Why do we see death and terrible situations? Remember what happened at the Holocaust and 9/11 and the tsunami that hit Indonesia, the hurricanes that have hit, or cyclones as they call them in other countries like Australia, and people who die as a result of them. You know, there are many people that are brought up in the church, but when they're not given these answers, when there is something like a tragedy in their life, then a lot of times, if anything, they get angry at God. As I travel around the world, one of the most asked questions I receive goes something like this: how can you as a Christian believe in a loving God when there's so much death and suffering in the world? Well, in this session, I'm going to start with the Bible, and we're going to look at the origin of sin and death to understand it's not God's fault this is a fallen world, it's actually our fault that there's so much death and sin and suffering. And secondly, I'm going to draw on a real-life example, how we as a family cope with the death of my younger brother who died of a horrible brain disease, yet he was a wonderful Bible-teaching pastor. How could a loving God allow something like that to happen? Well, there are answers, and that's what we want to share with you in this session so that you'll be able to go out and help others who have tragedy in their life and to help them understand how can we believe in a loving God when there's so much death and suffering in this world. How do we as Christians deal with the issue of death, suffering, tragedy in this world when at the same time the Bible tells us about a loving God? When a loved one dies, how do we cope with that? You know, in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 5, when we read those genealogies, you know, so-and-so begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so. If you really want to wake yourself up, make sure you read them carefully, because you'll also read, and he died, and he died, and he died, and he died, and he died. Actually, I remember someone telling me once about a man who called his pastor and said, "Oh, look, I'm bringing a non-Christian friend to church, and I really want you to make sure that you preach a great gospel message, and I want to see this guy saved, and I just want you to know that I'm bringing him, and this is the first time he's been in church, so make sure you preach the right sort of message." I wonder how many people tell their pastors that sort of thing. Anyway, the pastor had his Bible reading for his sermon, and it was basically one of these genealogies. So-and-so begat so-and-so, and he died. So-and-so begat so-and-so, and he died. And this man who brought his friend was sitting there just saying, "I don't believe this. Here I am bringing this non-Christian, and he has this Bible reading, and he died, and he died, and he's reading from the genealogies." Anyway, it was interesting. His friend actually became a Christian because he said he was sitting there and he was listening to this pastor reading, and he died, and he died, and he died, and he died, and he realized, I'm going to die. I need to do something about this. By the way, God's word is sharper than a two-edged sword. And it's God's word that will not return unto him void. And you know, when you read those genealogies, actually, to sort of quieten us down a little, do you realize as we read them, we could apply them to us? We could put our parents' name there. My father, a number of years ago now, passed away and is with the Lord. And one day that'll happen to us if the Lord doesn't come back before that time, and we can put our name there. You know, when a loved one dies, some people get very angry at God. There were people who were shaking their fist at God over what happened on 9/11. Why would God allow this? Why would this happen? Where's our God of love? Why would God allow people to die? You know, in Psalm 103, we read this, "But the mercy of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting." In Jeremiah 31, we read, "Yes, I have loved you with an everlasting love." And in 1 John 4, verse 16, we read, "And we have known and believed that the love that God has for us, God is love." And when we read those passages, and yet we think about tragedy and think about death and suffering in the world, how do we understand a loving God with death and suffering? You know, in the Bible, when God finished creating, after he created in 6 days and rested on the seventh, he said concerning his creation, everything was very good. Well, then if everything was very good, why do we see death and terrible situations? Remember what happened at the Holocaust and 9/11 and the tsunami that hit Indonesia, the hurricanes that have hit, or cyclones as they call them in other countries like